So I sent you the questions. I don't know if you even read them.
I looked over them once, I think,
That's
but
that's the best way to do it.
yeah,
It'll be a very authentic conversation.
yeah, exactly. I mean, based on the intro call you and I had, I don't think we'll have any problem
Surprise.
finding things to talk about.
No, not at all. Hello, and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Caleb Gardner. Caleb Gardner's career has been driven by curiosity and focused on change. For more than 3 years, he was the leading digital strategist for OFA, Barack Obama's political advocacy group. Caleb led one of the largest digital programs in existence, including the most followed Twitter account in the world, at Barack Obama. But his decades of experience don't just include work in government and politics. He's built operational frameworks for a variety of organizations in the public and private sectors, including at prestigious professional service firms like Bain and Company and Edelman. Now, as the co-founder and managing director of 18 Coffees, an innovation consulting firm, Caleb helps businesses with a mission to change the world get a foothold in the future, using his professional experience to solve impossible problems and bring new ideas to life for global clients such as United Way Worldwide, Bose Corporation, Comcast, and others. His new book, No Point B, Rules for Leading Change in the New Hyper-Connected, Radically Conscious Economy, will be published by Matt Holt Books, an imprint of Ben Bella Books, on August 9th, 2022. Caleb speaks, trains, and teaches part-time at the University of Chicago on topics related to innovation, marketing, and change management. Before we hear from Caleb, I want to invite you to share at the podium with the people in your lives. If you find our conversation today helpful, and I hope that you will, take a screenshot and share on your Instagram and tag at the podium _ Patrick Huey. Or if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, share our links there. Your shares, likes, and 5-star written reviews help grow our audience and move us up the charts. I'm grateful for your support in this capacity. Okay, Caleb, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm very happy to have you today, particularly given all of the historical things that have transpired in the last 48 hours in America. I would love to, first of all, get your perspective on what happened in Mar-a-Lago yesterday with the Fed going into the home and as far as we know, as much as we know, seizing documents from the president. Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, as far as I've read, it sounds like it was based on things that were taken from the White House, which is, there are specific laws around archiving and recording what happens at the White House. And so it sounds like it was related to trying to fetch those kinds of documents. I am not a legal expert by any means, but I do know a lot of legal experts and follow a lot of legal experts on Twitter. Even saying that makes me sound like even less of an expert. But there are a lot of smart people out there, and I respect this opinion that if not only the FBI thought that this was worth pursuing, that there was enough evidence to pursue, but also a independent judge signed off on this, that the bar to do this in a former president's home had to be extremely high and extremely credible. So we'll see what they turn up. I don't know when we'll find that out, but it's a pretty unprecedented day for that to have happened.
You were a history major in college, so this must be candy for you in a way, because we've never in the history of the country lived through something like this. I mean, I guess John Tyler joined the Confederacy, but no one remembers that. It kind of took my breath away when I saw this, just in conjunction with what's happening around all the different probes into his business, into his acts while he was in the White House. And then we have this raid in Mar-a-Lago. And I would assume, again, I'm no legal expert, but I would assume that if there's something there that they find that's related to other inquiries, that becomes fair game.
I think that's right. It's funny because I feel like at this, both in my time in working for the Obama organization and, a lot of times in the past 5 years, it does feel like you're simultaneously living through history and having an out of body experience where you're watching it happen and thinking like, how am I going to talk to my grandchildren who are going to ask me about this moment in history? Last night was one of those moments where it felt unprecedented. I mean, the best analogy that I saw people making was probably Watergate, and even that wasn't like the residence of a former president. So it's wild. It's wild to think about.
I think about what happened yesterday in context with the Alex Jones decision. And if you think that will have a chilling effect on what has really been the proliferation of just outright lies over the past almost 10 years in our public discourse. I know there may not be criminal liability there, but there's certainly judgments against him that are quite financially ruinous. And I wonder if you think that will have a chilling effect on others who engage in the game of misinformation.
I hope that it does, but I don't have a lot of optimism that it will. And here's the reason why. Alex Jones is an apex predator of misinformation. And I'm using language from a couple of professors that have talked about online misinformation being like a biosphere, like an ecosystem, where at the top you've got the people who, like Alex Jones, who have a huge megaphone, a huge platform. Some of them have now been deplatformed off a lot of the major social networks, but even when they do, they still have TV shows or they still have, other ways to get out their messaging. But they are all supported by people in the rest of the internet ecosystem, especially on social media, that reshare their ideas, that retweet them, that talk about them, that share them in public and private forums, both, on their news feeds, also in private groups where we don't even see how that is shared and proliferated. So the apex predators only have the power that the rest of us give them in that ecosystem. And unfortunately, we are, even those of us who don't agree with the ideas, very bad at resisting sharing them. This happens all of the time with friends of mine on social networks and drives me insane, where someone will retweet something or quote tweet it or reshare it and be like, look how crazy this is. And I'm like, you just reshared it. You just gave it more oxygen.
Yeah.
Like, we don't, even when we disagree with it, we can't help but spread lies. We are living through this really interesting time where we have all of this amazing power to reach people all over the globe. We have not really reconciled what that responsibility is as us, as individual internet users, as individual carriers of supercomputers in our pockets. What are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to lean in? Where are we not supposed to lean in? How do we resist misinformation and disinformation and, the ideas that we don't want to take hold in public consciousness without resharing them, without giving them more oxygen? Like, we don't have a lot of practice with that kind of thing. And so it's great when someone at the top gets knocked down a peg, but we still have all of that oxygen being driven up, underneath the surface, underneath the iceberg, if I can switch metaphors for a second. That is a lot harder to control, and it's especially a lot harder to target with legal or civil enforcement.
Well, it's interesting because you wrote an essay in 2016 and you asked this question. So you were seeing the future at that time when you wrote the essay in 2016. And the essay was called, and I'm going to read it here just to make sure I get the title right, because it was a beautiful essay. It was called Reconciling the Internet's Role in the Rise of Trump. And your subheading for the essay is, the internet was supposed to be the greatest democratic tool of all time. What happened? And you answer your own question in that essay. You speak to the democratization of the communication channels so that we're all no longer watching Brokaw, Jennings, and Rather at 7 p.m. on a weeknight. But you say that that democratization weakened the free press and fragmented how people receive their news sources, and that it created and amplified an echo chamber effect and a reverse, I love this phrase, Helen Razor's effect, which I had to look up. But the Helen Razor effect really talks about that we should never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. But in the case that we're talking about today with the Alex Joneses of the world, with the Donald Trumps of the world, there really is potentially an underlying sense of malice and great intentionality in misinformation. And if that is the case, how do we ever live through, how do we ever reconcile what's happening today in our social and media discourses? Is that even possible?
It is possible, but it's hard. I mean, I think that when I wrote that, obviously I was just coming out of the Obama organization and pretty despondent about what felt at the time like the inevitability of the rise of not just misinformation or disinformation, but this ability to go around fact checkers, to go around kind of the traditional gatekeepers of polite society, really, and just be completely shameless about spreading lies. And I was a little bit self-reflective about how we in the Obama organization had started that trend. I mean, the president, when he started campaigning in 2007, 2008, and then came to the White House, we were celebrating the fact that Obama could go directly to the people through digital channels and spread his message of hope and change and, you know, all of those kind of original Obama platforms, and say, like, don't listen to the traditional cynical DC gatekeepers. We can actually do great things together. Well, the problem is that when we
Mm,
proved the model of going around the gatekeepers, we then proved that anyone can go around the gatekeepers, even people with malicious intent.
mm,
And they could actually create their own audience just like we had, only outside of the realm of polite, kind of that Overton window of polite political conversation, outside of the realm of things like fact checking and just completely gaslight an entire nation with their own audience and people that would love them no matter what. So I was self-reflective about our role in creating that model and how it had been twisted and used, for the Trump campaign's end. And I was really starting to lose my naivete about how the internet was going to be a democratizing force. I still believe that it can be a democratizing force, but I think I'm a lot more pragmatic about how. I think with that we've built a lot of systems in the internet that are based on quote unquote engagement, eyeballs, things that incentivize us to do things that aren't actually productive for a healthy functioning democracy. So I think some of it has to be, how do we build business models in the internet that are a little bit healthier and encourage democratic participation in healthy ways? Some of that is going to have to come from innovation and new companies. I think some of it's going to have to come from the massive behemoth tech companies that own so much of the public sphere right now, having a little bit more accountability. I think there was some self-reflection after 2016 and after 2020, but in my opinion, there hasn't been nearly enough change at those companies. So that's one piece I think that's going to have to come from government regulation and oversight. There's been a lot of movement around trying to keep the tech industry in check. There's been a lot more interesting things happening in Europe than there are here, but we're starting to catch up a little bit. I think that's going to have to be a big piece. And then there has to be some kind of movement for owning our own responsibility around it
mm,
and becoming more digital literate and media literate and understanding and being able to critique what we're being fed and how we're being persuaded and how these platforms work to change our point of view, or in some cases cement our point of view. That's going to have to come through education. It's going to have to come through critical self-reflection and scaling up different ways for us to find different context for our own, to be able to challenge our own ideas. I think that's an underrated piece, but it goes back to that, what we were just talking about the social media biosphere and our own participation in the spreading of bad ideas. Like we have to address it at the individual level as well as the systemic level.
Your answer makes me think, and you use the word naive to describe the way in which you guys moved into to this idea of going directly to the people and bypassing the networks. And I think it happens on the Democratic side and the Republican side, that people look with a suspicious eye at the media, and that's probably a well-earned suspicion. But I think the naive part comes in, and perhaps it is the hopeful part of the American ethos, is that we thought people were smart enough not to believe the nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But what was surprising to me was the sheer, and I don't want to overstate the numbers, because I think sometimes that is part of the problem with the media, that they take two people's opinions and turn it into a movement when it's
Mm-hmm.
not. But if we're even talking 30% of the population, which I think is a reasonable argument, that's always been outside of the sort of normal political discourse that happens in America that we've established over the past almost 300 years, just the ease with which people bought into things that we just knew were not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, I think, was the most surprising piece. And in the way that it, in a sense, radicalized many people who would otherwise be going through their lives. What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think that the naivete part to me comes in when thinking about how access to information and access to data was supposed to make us smarter. And I think what we have realized is that access to information is not enough. One, because people's minds don't change just because they're presented with counterfactuals. We've learned that there's something called the backfire effect that actually will have people entrench their core beliefs when presented with counterfactuals, because their core beliefs are so crucial to their identity. But we also have been fed this narrative about democratized information and especially data providing certainty. And so, as the tech industry has said, look at all this, look at all we can learn, look at all we can have access to in terms of the world's information. We can look how much of the world is knowable. It has created this false perception that we can have certainty about things that are essentially uncertain and will always be uncertain. So we've given people more information, and in certain cases we've given people more knowledge, but we certainly have not provided more wisdom. We certainly have not provided the ability to self-reflect or be self-critical. And so we were in this weird tension of feeling like we can know anything and actually knowing less than ever before. Like we both at the same time can pick up our, supercomputers we carry around in our pockets and say what's the answer to X, and then get an answer that feels certain but actually is very uncertain or untrue. So there is, again, both an individual piece of being self-critical and self-reflective, and a systemic part of how are we guaranteeing that the information we're providing to people has some self-reflection and has some, a disclaimer even that it might not be true, or it needs more information, or it needs more facts. I think about how Google, when you search for something, their attempt is to give you the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
They even call it the zero moment of truth. Like, I've searched for something, is the top result exactly what I need to hear? And yet they have been caught giving people misinformation as the top result, because even Google doesn't provide you with that critical thinking. And so just to give you a quick example, in 2017, right when Trump came into office, if you on your Google Home, which is their audio, their equivalent of an Alexa, said, "Hey Google, is Obama planning a coup?" it would have said yes. Because "is Obama planning a coup" on Google search results brought up a blog talking about how the President Obama was working with the Chinese government to overthrow the Trump administration. And that was the number one source of authority for Google search results for a short time. And so we've created an ecosystem, again, where we're trying to provide certainty, but actually we're just providing more information, and it's not always good information.
You said something interesting now around the idea of critical thinking. And so, is it an education question? Is it and I think if you tie the idea perhaps of a lack of rigor in education with the idea of self-identity being the leading guide in terms of what we respond to and what emotionally resonates for us. How do we move through that when there's such there are many battles being fought right now against education and libraries and books and reading. We see what's happening in Florida and Texas and states like that. But it's all how do we unravel this knot of lack of education with a strong sense of belief of who you identify to be?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I think that part of a good education is being taught subjects that you wouldn't have naturally wouldn't have
Gravitated.
naturally gravitated towards, and being taught to do things that aren't necessarily hard skills, right? Like, we all complain about, you know, critical studies in literature in college, or we're learning history in high school or whatever it is, but part of that is learning to be self-critical and self-reflective. And even when we're doing hard skills like STEM education, coding, math, things that you don't think about having to have those same kind of critical thinking skills. And so when we as a society are promoting things like STEM education above, things that I went to, which is a BA in, a classical study, what we're doing is we're saying those kinds of self-critical thinking skills aren't as important as the hard skills. And I
Mm,
think that's why you have seen Silicon Valley over the last few years put more of a premium on human-centered skills now, because they realize that when we hire a bunch of engineers, we actually don't have the people who can be as self-critical about ethical issues around how our products are, designed to work with people. We don't have sociologists or psychologists or ethicists at the table to say, oh, wait, hold up. The unintended consequences of that product could be X, Y, or Z. So they're starting to try to supplement their teams with those kinds of thinkers, but it took them a long time, and their products were already having massive effects on society before they started thinking about building in that kind of structure into how they design products.
mm,
So I education to me is both a function of how do we design the education system to be more digital media literate? How do we be more self-reflective individually and encourage that digital media literacy individually? And how do we actually build systemic resources into the products themselves to create friction around sharing things that maybe we haven't read, or to encourage different ideas to interact with things that confirm what we already believe? So again, to me, it comes back to, and this is a little bit of complexity theory. I write about this in my book. Like, we have to look at us individually as systems at the same time as we look at society as a system or our workplace as a system. So to me, the solutions always scale from us as individuals back up to how we think about it at the company level, how we think about it at the political and society level.
I wonder, Caleb, if, and I don't want to point a finger at the free press,
Point
but
away.
point away them, those. But I wonder if the free press could have been weakened as so much as it is, and this concept of a shared knowledge have been weakened if it hadn't been misused in the decades leading up to 2016. I mean, you
Mm,
can make the argument that in many ways Watergate was the press's finest moment, and how it
mhm.
handled that, and how the Washington Post and the New York Times really sort of galvanized around this concept of there is a right and wrong, and there's a moral center that we in the country must adhere to. But I think that somewhere, and if we want to put a date on it, perhaps the 1990s, specifically with the Clinton Lewinsky affair, the arrival of Matt Drudge on the scene, and the advent of cable news, I think the die in a sense was cast for what happened in 2016. And also, you have to think too, Caleb, that until we had a democratization of media and access, we were really given only one view of the world that didn't include Black people, that didn't include gay people,
Mhm.
that for the most part didn't include women. So I wonder if in the decades leading up to 2016, if we sort of laid the predicate for the advent of InfoWars and all that we're living through right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far back as to say, there's been there's been the cyclical nature of our news cycle in this country has been part of the free press for since yellow journalism in the 1800s even.
Mhm.
So and the distribution of print and being able to choose your different sources there. So it's very strange to think about how the problems that we face today were of a different nature, but also very similar back then. But I do think you make a good point about the change in the media landscape that started in the 90s, cemented in the early 2000s, and really took off in the 2010s.
Mm.
I would point at the rise of Fox News in the late 1900s and the early 2000s, and the what's a good word to say? The sportification of reporting on news that started in the 90s and really took off with both Fox and CNN and other 24-hour news cycles needing to keep people entertained and not just informed. I think that laid the groundwork for how news got then turned into internet content. And we already talked about engagement being the number one, goal of most internet content. The die was cast with how we were already taught to look at news as a sport, and now we're actually measuring it through sports like kinds of metrics. Which story got the most traction, the most eyeballs, the most engagement? How did we write headlines to get people to click through? How do we sensationalize them? Again, sensationalizing the news isn't a new thing, but being able to sensationalize it at scale and really find niche audiences around that sensationalism is very new.
In your role in the Obama administration, were you under the White House press office, or did you sit in a different place within the West Wing?
I was part of OFA, so actually the nonprofit advocacy group that worked alongside the White House.
So how much coordination was there between your efforts there and what was happening within the administration?
These are the kinds of questions I am not allowed to answer without an attorney present.
I just stepped into the trap. Bam,
You did.
halfway in. Understood. Moving on to the next question. How much
It's a very,
FaceTime did you
very fine line.
it's a very fine line. How much FaceTime were you able to have with the president and Mrs. Obama, and what did you learn about leadership, about history from
Mhm.
being that close to living history?
I did have some FaceTime. I mean, there were definitely many layers between me and the president, so lots of people more closer to his inner circle.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that all the things that you assume about the president in terms of his charisma and his ability to charm a room are true about him in an individual setting as well. I think that he has always been, in my experience at least, the same Barack Obama publicly as he is privately, at least a version of that. Obviously, there are things he can say and do privately that he can't do publicly, but I think that he has always tried to, from the first campaign, not let the office or the public eye change him or his family. And I think that Michelle would say the same. And I think she even, to a certain extent, even more tightly controls how her public message is distributed and how her public image is perceived. She's always tried to kind of walk the line of supporting the president and the Democratic Party without necessarily being seen as quote unquote political herself.
Mhm.
Her team, both when they were in office and now, does a really good job of walking that line. But similarly, I think that the Obama family has really tried to maintain a sense of integrity while being in the public eye that I personally think they should be um, congratulated for. I think they've done a great job.
I think two things about what you just said. I think one, the fact that you didn't respond to my first question as we sort of switched into Obama world shows shows just how important what happened this past week is. That those
Mm,
oaths and those structures are in place for a reason. And that we
mhm,
have a former president who did not really take that seriously and took documents that maybe he should not have taken and did not return when requested really speaks to, I think, an integrity issue.
mhm,
Um, so I think what your first answer to my first question, I think highlights just how important it is that we follow the structures that are in place to protect the democracy of the country on a
I
very
think it. I agree with you, and I also think the difference between the Obama White House and the Trump White House really showed us how much of that office was based on norms and expectations and not necessarily even laws or rules. I think it showed that people come into that office with different policy positions, and we might agree with them, we might not agree with them, but mostly they held the office in high regard itself and tried to operate publicly in a way that in the best way they saw fit to lead the nation and be a moral example for the nation.
Mm.
Um, I think Trump was one of the first, at least in recent memory, again, as a history major, I'm not going to say no one has ever done this, but at least in recent history, who really held no regard and no shame about completely no sense of moral leadership at all. And I think that the disconnect between the Obamas and the Trumps really was striking and really set us back in a lot of ways in terms of global moral leadership.
You said in your second answer to my question that you felt that President Obama was really able to occupy that office and maintain the sort of core and center of who he is. And I wonder for you personally, having been through 3 or 4 years of an administration, even on the arm that you were in, did you shift or change in that process and what you learned about yourself by being so close to history? I mean, we can make the argument, Caleb, that you were the voice of one of the most powerful, transformative movements in the country, and probably since FDR, realistically, or
Mhm.
Kennedy.
Yeah, I want to give the current administration credit too. Legislatively, I think they've been hugely successful, especially in the last few months
Yes,
on
yes.
an FDR kind of level. But I mean, in terms of how I've changed, I'm a lot more gray. I mean, I feel like I aged many years in that time, like worrying about a misspelling in a tweet, causing Josh Earnest to have to address something in a press briefing. Like, I think that the couple of things. I mean, I think when you come into that kind of work, it's so meaningful, and you're working with so many people who are just about making the world better, that it's personally transformative in a way that I think affects the rest of your ability to do, you know, like your job the rest of your life. Like, I think that what I realized very quickly coming out of Obama world was that, oh, there's gonna have to be an element of citizenship, political engagement, doing something that makes the world better as a piece of what I do the rest of my life. Like, there's no coming out of that kind of role and then just disengaging,
Mm.
right? Like, you're always part of the Obama family, you're always part of the Democratic Party now, you're always part of someone running for office now. I mean, there's people in the Obama family, they're now going off and running campaigns or running for office themselves. Like, it's a perpetual thing that you're a part of. So I think that's important. But, just personally, I think doing something that at those stakes also just kind of shows you what you're capable of. And I would say it very much shifted my risk tolerance. Like, I started a company after that. Like, I just published a book. Like, there's there's things where people are like, wow, that must have been really hard and you must be really
Mm.
stressed out. And I'm like, no, like, I don't I don't worry about not sending an email and 100,000 people don't get healthcare. Like, those were the stakes that I was working at. If my company fails, it's a bummer, but that's just on me. Like, that's not stressful. So
Mm.
it's just like shifted my perception of what a crisis is or what risk is completely.
So your company now, your consultancy is called 18 Coffees. I wonder where that name came from, and I wonder what the focus of your work today is through that company.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you about it. I mean,
Uh,
my business partner and I focus on transformation now and change. So it's the core of our work, and we really focus at the intersection of technology, the future of work and social disruption. So how's that changing the direction of business, and how can we help companies really catch up with the trends in all those areas? Love the work that I do now. Again, does not feel as high risk as my Obama days, but feels very important and very rewarding. The name came from, if you've ever started a company or named a child and you really had to name something important, and you've realized, oh my God, every name is terrible. Like, we came up with things that were more creative, came up with things that were more straightforward and professional, and we hated everything. And then finally, one day I said, look, it doesn't matter what we call it. We're going to have to build equity in whatever name the company is. We're going to have to, like, the most important thing is that we find a website that's free. So you just give me a number. I'm going to give you a flavor of ice cream. If it's free and we don't hate it, we're just going to go with that name. My business partner is Chinese by origin, and she 18 is a lucky number in Chinese culture. I was on a coffee ice cream binge at the time. I still love coffee ice cream. We put it together, and neither of us hated it. And I was like, fine, decision made. I'm buying the website. We're incorporating. We're going to stop having this conversation. We're done. Next.
I love that. I was looking through your website, which is beautiful just from a user perspective. It's incredibly agile and intuitive. I was digging through the website and I came across my personal impact canvas assessment, which you use this for the people that you're working with. And you went in on it. The very first level of assessment that you look at is that person's ambition. And you ask the question in the personal assessment, how do you want to change the world? So I turn and I ask you the same question. How do you want to change the world? And why do you want to change the world in that way?
I love that you brought up this tool because it's related to the conversation we've been having. I actually made it in December of 2016 originally, because I had so many friends and family members coming out of the woodwork saying, Trump was just elected. I'm devastated. Like, what do I do now? Like, how do I get involved? And I wanted something that I could give to them that said, like, you don't have to get involved in everything. Like, here's a way to create your own context and figure out how you can make an impact when, given your life constraints. You have kids, you're in school, you've got a job, whatever it is, you have realistic, a box that you have to work within. You've got things that you care about. What's an exercise you can do that says, what's my ambition, over what timelines, what assets and constraints do I have? And that's where the impact canvas came from. And now it's featured in my book, which is really fun. So it's been around as a tool I've been giving people. And I think it helps individual people, and it also can help teams think through this similar problems.
Your book comes out today.
It comes out today. Yeah. It's wild. Been watching it on all the sites, like, go from available August 9th to available now. It's crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah. But to answer your question, I've always seen myself kind of as the guy behind the guy. I don't necessarily feel like I'm gonna ever run for president or run for public office. Maybe I'll do, like, a local office one day when I'm older or whatever, as a way to give back. But I think I feel really great when I can empower other people to see their agency in making change. I do that with my clients. That's part of why I'm writing the book. It's part of why I worked for the president. Like, I have a certain amount of expertise in technology and communications, and navigating this crazy world we've been talking about, and understanding our digital media environment. And I really want to use that in a way that enables others to see their own impact and scale up, people out of being cynical about their ability to make change into feeling like they have agency. So that's the mission of why I exist and why we built the company we did, why I keep writing, a lot of the things we've been talking about.
You said something that just sort of hit me in my solar plexus, which is I would love for us to be able to move as a society, as a world, through this phase of cynicism. I think we're living in an incredibly cynical time. I don't want to also sort of glorify and romanticize previous eras and decades, but there were lots of problems in the 1950s for Black people. It wasn't the best decade for Black people, but there was, I believe, a pervading sense of hope. even as the civil rights movement began to really sort of take a more pronounced effort forward. I mean, that was when we had Brown v. Board passed in the Supreme Court, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. But
Right.
there was, we have lived in moments as a society where there was hope, where there was an idea that we can do better, we can change, even if it's difficult. You know, the dream is that we move past the cynicism of today into a time of hope again, which is what the president you supported ran on. But you know, I think that resonated because we need hope, and we've been so cynical for the last 4 decades, and I hope we're able to move past that.
Yeah.
That was more of a comment than a question, but my
But I liked it. I liked it. It was good.
yeah, my question for you is when people are taking personal assessments and talking about their ambitions and sort of what impact they can make, does it have to scale to a global level? Because that's the question you ask. Like, what's the impact that you want to have on the world? And does it, when you're thinking about your life in the quiet of the night, does it need to be global? Can it be that I just want to be a good dad? You have 2 kids, right? You
I
know,
have 3.
you have 3.
I have 3, yeah.
You know, is that enough? Is that enough? Or do we need to all be making the big leaps?
I don't think we all need to have global ambition, but I do think that we need to understand how our own individual sphere of influence affects the global community. Because
Mm,
I think what's true about how we live life now is that our own individual decisions have ripple effects beyond just our physical geography. I mean, we were just talking about the social media biosphere. And when I share something to my 100 followers that doesn't feel like it's very meaningful, how can that actually reverberate in terms of contributing to a negative media environment? It
mm,
doesn't feel like that decision has a great impact, but collectively it does. And so we do have to understand that we live in a globally connected community, even if our ambition isn't global. I don't think it has to be global. In fact, in the impact canvas, I break it down on one dimension over time and in the other dimension over our spheres of influence. How do I have influence over my friends and family? How do I have influence in my workplace or my local community? And then how do I have broader global influence? And I think that again, you don't have to run for office, you don't have to start some kind of global NGO to have impact. It can start in your family, it can start in your local community, as long as we understand how that piece fits into the larger theory of change.
mm,
If I get involved in my local environmental justice advocacy group, what larger impact are we going to have collectively with other people working for environmental justice? I think that is an important part to have. But part of what the impact canvas tries to do is contextualize that for yourself. I can feel like I'm having a global impact, even if I'm just working with my local community.
where does this come from within you?
Where does it come from within me? I mean, I think it comes from what we were just talking about my mission feeling like I want to empower people to see their own agency. But it
Mm,
also just comes from my experience, like working for the Obama organization and some of the other great clients I've gotten to work for. I've seen how the only way change happens is when we collectively believe that it can happen and we collectively work for it. And
mm,
so connecting that individual agency back to collective action is a really important piece that I don't think we tie the thread of those 2 things together enough.
Does that come from your parents, or is that something that you learned on your own? Was that part of the soup that was your childhood growing
It was a soup, yeah.
up?
That's a good question. I'm sure it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of, being just naturally curious. It's a little bit of studying history as an undergraduate and then working for the president. I mean, I like that you call it a soup. It's a little bit of all of that.
Is it's all there. It's all within the DNA and
That's
the
right.
lived experience. You've had an amazing life. You've had an amazing career, one that, you know, is storied in many ways. What part of your life took the biggest leap of faith for you?
I would say that the biggest leap of faith that I took was probably marrying my wife and having kids. Anyone who brings kids into the world being a parent is a natural act of optimism. To be able to bring life into this world means that you are at least not cynical enough to believe your kids will have a good life, right? I mean, I literally know people who are afraid to have kids right now because of the state of the world. And so having kids, raising them to believe what you believe is both a transformative act of that individual decisions becoming collective action, because you're helping proliferate what you hope is the next generation to be able to make change. But I also think it is just it's a vote for the future, in a way that you believe that has to be hopeful and optimistic by its very nature.
Mm. Caleb, in this season of the show, we're talking to people who have found their voice or in the process of finding their voice. And I wonder if you have found your voice, and if you have, what do you want to say with that?
Oh man, has anyone ever felt like they really found their voice? I feel like the only way people step up into leadership, for the most part, I think there are surely exceptions to this, is by being called to a moment and stepping into that moment before you feel ready. I think that's what I did when I joined the Obama organization without any political experience, because I, believed in the president. I think it's what I did when I just published a book, even though I'm super intellectually anxious about putting ideas down on paper. I mean, I feel like I'm simultaneously finding my voice and using it. And I think that's all we can ever do. How I would want to use it, and this is kind of the message of the book and the message of really my career to this point, is we can never stop making change or changing ourselves. Like the central conceit of the book is change has to be a core competency. We have to sharpen the skills of making change, and we have to sharpen the skills of changing ourselves and critiquing ourselves and learning and staying curious all the time. And so if I could use my voice for one thing, that would be it for sure.
Mm. Caleb, thank you so much for your time today and sitting down with me, even though I trespassed one of the rules of the conversation.
That's totally all right.
But
we made it work.
Thank you so much for your time and your voice and your wisdom and just your perspective on a very full time that we're living through right now. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice, so use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Caleb.